to the explanations which Joe gave to the chief of the desire of the pale-faces to be friends with the red men. Joe's eloquence would have done little for him on this occasion had his hands been empty, but he followed it up by opening one of his packs and displaying the glittering contents before the equally glittering eyes of the chief and his squaws. "These," said Joe, "are the gifts that the great chief of the pale-faces sends to the great chief of the Pawnees. And he bids me to say that there are many more things in his stores which will be traded for skins with the red men when they visit him. And he also says that if the Pawnees will not steal horses any more from the pale-faces, they shall receive gifts of knives and guns and powder and blankets every year." "Wah!" grunted the chief. "It is good. The great chief is wise. We will smoke the pipe of peace." The things that afforded so much satisfaction to San-it-sa-rish were the veriest trifles: penny looking-glasses in yellow gilt tin frames, beads of various colors, needles, cheap scissors and knives, vermilion paint, and coarse scarlet cloth, etc. They were of priceless value, however, in the estimation of the savages, who delighted to adorn themselves with leggings made from cloth, beautifully worked with beads by their own ingenious women. They were thankful, too, for knives even of the commonest description, having none but bone ones of their own; and they gloried in daubing their faces with intermingled streaks of charcoal and vermilion. To gaze at their visages, when thus treated, in the penny looking-glasses, is their summit of delight. Joe presented the chief with a portion of these coveted goods, and tied up the remainder. We may remark here that the only thing which prevented the savages from taking possession of the whole at once, without asking permission, was the promise of the annual gifts, which they knew would not be forthcoming were any evil to befall the deputies of the pale-faces. Nevertheless, it cost them a severe struggle to restrain their hands on this occasion, and Joe and his companions felt that they would have to play their part well in order to fulfill their mission with safety and credit. "The pale-faces may go now and talk with the braves," said San-it-sa-rish, after carefully examining everything that was given to him. "A council will be called soon, and we will smoke the pipe of peace." Accepting this permission to retire, the hunters immediately left the tent, and, being now at liberty to do what they pleased, they amused themselves by wandering about the village. "He's a cute chap, that," remarked Joe, with a sarcastic smile. "I don't feel quite easy about getting away. He'll bother the life out of us to get all the goods we've got. And, you see, as we've other tribes to visit, we must give away as little as we can here." "Ha! You is right," said Henry. "Dat fellow's eyes twinkle at the knives and tings like two stars." "Fireflies, ye should say. Stars are too soft and beautiful to compare to the eyes of yon savage," said Dick, laughing. "I wish we were all away from them. That rascal Mattawa is an ugly customer." "True, lad," returned Joe. "Had he been the great chief, our scalps had been drying into smoke a Pawnee wigwam afore now. What now, lad?" Joe's question was put in consequence of a gleeful smile that overspread the countenance of Dick Varley, who replied by pointing to a wigwam towards which they were approaching. "Oh, that's only a dandy," exclaimed Joe. "There's lots of them in every Injun camp. They're fit for nothing but dress. Poor contemptible critters." Joe accompanied his remark with a sneer. For all pitiable objects he regarded an unmanly man as the most despicable. He consented, however, to sit down on a grassy bank and watch the proceedings of this Indian dandy, who had just seated himself in front of his wigwam for the purpose of making his toilet. He began it by greasing his whole person carefully and smoothly over with buffalo fat, until he shone like a patent leather boot. Then he rubbed himself almost dry, leaving the skin sleek and glossy. Having proceeded thus far, he took up a small mirror a few inches in diameter, which he or some other member of the tribe must have procured during one of their few excursions to the trading forts of the pale-faces, and examined himself, as well as he could, in so limited a space. Next he took a little vermilion from a small parcel and rubbed it over his face, until it presented the somewhat demoniac appearance of a fiery red. He also drew a broad red score along the crown of his head, which was closely shaved, with the exception of the usual tuft or scalp lock on the top. This scalp lock stood bristling straight up a few inches, and then it curved over and hung down his back about 2 feet. Immense care and attention was bestowed on this lock. He smoothed it, greased it, and plaited it into the form of a pigtail. Another application was here made to the glass, and the result was evidently satisfactory, to judge from the beaming smile that played on his features. But not content with the general effect, he tried the effect of expression, frowned pretentiously, scowled savagely, gaped hideously, and grinned horribly a ghastly smile. Then our dandy fitted into his ears, which were bored in several places, sundry ornaments, such as rings, wampum, etc., and hung several strings of beads around his neck. Besides these, he affixed 1 or 2 ornaments to his arms, wrists, and ankles, and touched in a few effects with vermilion on the shoulders and breast. After this, and a few more glances at the glass, he put on a pair of beautiful moccasins, which, besides being richly wrought with beads, were soft as chamois leather, and fitted his feet like gloves. A pair of leggings of scarlet cloth were drawn on, attached to a waist belt, and bound below the knee with broad garters of variegated beadwork. It was some time before this Adonis was quite satisfied with himself. He retouched the paint on his shoulders several times, and modified the glare of that on his wide-mouthed, high-cheeked-bone visage, before he could tear himself away. But at last he did so, and, throwing a large piece of scarlet cloth over his shoulders, he thrust his looking-glass under his belt, and proceeded to mount his palfrey, which was held in readiness near to the tent door by one of his wives. The horse was a really fine animal, and seemed worthy of a more warlike master. His shoulders, too, were striped with red paint, and feathers were intertwined with his mane and tail, while the bridle was decorated with various jingling ornaments. Vaulting upon his steed with a large fan of wild goose and turkey feathers in one hand, and a whip dangling at the wrist of the other, this incomparable dandy sallied forth for a promenade, that being his chief delight when there was no buffalo hunting to be done. Other men who were not dandies sharpened their knives, smoked, feasted, and mended their spears and arrows at such seasons of leisure, or played at athletic games. "Let's follow my buck," said Joe Blunt. "Oui, come along," replied Henry, striding after the rider at a pace that almost compelled his comrades to run. "Hold on," cried Dick, laughing. "We don't want to keep him company. A distant view is quite enough for sic a chap as that." "Mais you forget I cannot see far." "So much the better," remarked Joe. "It's my opinion we've seen enough of him. Ah, he's going on to look at the games. Them's worth looking at." The games to which Joe referred were taking place on a green level plain close to the creek, and a little above the waterfall before referred to. Some of the Indians were horse racing, some jumping, others wrestling; but the game which proved most attractive was throwing the javelin, in which several of the young braves were engaged. This game is played by 2 competitors, each armed with a dart, in an arena about 50 yards long. One of the players has a hoop of 6 inches in diameter. At a signal they start off on foot at full speed, and on reaching the middle of the arena the Indian with the hoop rolls it along before them, and each does his best to send a javelin through the hoop before the other. He who succeeds counts so many points. If both miss, the nearest to the hoop is allowed to count, but not so much as if he had ringed it. The Indians are very fond of this game, and will play at it under a broiling sun for hours together, but a good deal of the interest attaching to it is owing to the fact that they make it a means of gambling. Indians are inveterate gamblers, and will sometimes go on until they lose horses, bows, blankets, robes, and, in short, their whole personal property. The consequences are, as might be expected, that fierce and bloody quarrels sometimes arise, in which life is often lost. "Try your hand at that," said Henry to Dick. "By all means," cried Dick, handing his rifle to his friend, and springing into the ring enthusiastically. A general shout of applause greeted the pale-face, who threw off his coat and tightened his belt, while a young